No, I'm not Dr. Evil, but we will talk about evil and other words for the same thing. And good to see you guys here. And I am also to the invisible beings here in the front row. Thanks for coming as well. I'm going to sit up here, folks, and a lot of slides. And welcome. I'm from the Vietnam generation, and I became sort of obsessed with the issue of demonic evil in the Vietnam era. And a lot of us might be from that period. And we're marked a little bit by the trauma of that, right, of the Vietnam era. But we've had a number of other ones since then. And they just keep coming. And so each of these is depth of sort of evil perpetration. And, we all think about this problem, good and evil. And what I want to bring forward is there are gradations of good and evil, but we're going to focus on evil, unfortunately, but good as well. Good has gradations, right? So you start out as a child and you just get, more mature, and then, in your later in life, we hope you get, wisdom. And so there's gradations of growth toward goodness. So let's keep that in mind as we dive deep into the issue, the more dark side. And also to kind of anchor you emotionally and spiritually, I want to do a little bit of meditation. And it fits with the theme, which is how do we think about evil in relation to what is good, and particularly if you have a God-centered spirituality that you're living. This is not really directed at secular folks, but I think secular folks will still benefit from these concepts. They're I think, universal concepts about morality. Really, it's about moral philosophy. That's what we're talking about. So it's kind of mental stuff, but it's also visceral too. Because when you encounter something that's hurtful, you feel it deeply. And somehow we need to process this. First, we need to understand what it is, or maybe not even first, but we need to get to a point where we understand it, so we can heal the trauma through a variety of means. And but I think in order to really get into the subject, we want to anchor in the spirit in three ways. I'm going to suggest. Well, let me ask you this. Let me just ask. If you were looking for God or spirit, where would you look? Just give me a phrase or a word.
Heart.
In the heart?
Nature.
Nature. Anywhere else?
Revelation, scriptures.
Scripture, thank you.
Philosophy. Yeah.
In theology, philosophy. So I want to suggest kind of more spatial metaphor that, let's say you're Buddhist, you would say the Buddha nature, right, which is within. Old style Christians would say it's up there, right? Progressive thinkers would say it's in the future, right? We're moving toward the omega, which is like God's plan for us that we're moving towards. So that's another, you can go forward to get it, you can go up to get it, you can go within to get it, or you can go into the space itself. Space has the presence of deity. So I want to suggest that deity is present within, but not just within. It's present in heaven, but not just in heaven, right up there, and it's present in the future where we're going, but it's also present in space. And in theology, we say deity is transcendent, upstairs, is immanent in you or in nature, or that deity is omnipresent, right? So the omnipresence is the spatial presence in all space of love, this loving energy, this divine energy, grace. So the meditation is a threefold meditation to not just do what you may routinely do. A lot of us go within, into the heart, as was said. Try to do that while at the same time feeling the spatial presence as well as the transcendent presence. So this is a multidimensional meditation. So let's just spend a few minutes and do that. So again, it's the presence of the infinite with you, interior, in your inner life. And it's the presence of this loving deity in heaven, traditional idea of God looking down on us and loving us, and that presence. So that's a different kind of presence. And then there's the envelopment of all of us, envelopment of our bodies, envelopment of this room, of the earth, of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, if you will. So try to feel all those at the same time. So you can breathe into it. You can breathe into the interior world around the heart, where there's a presence of Spirit around the heart in your inner world. And you're breathing out. You're breathing. You're part of space. You're part of the world, and as you're participating by actually inhaling and exhaling into the space, which is occupied by God's presence. And then hold those, just kind of hold those feelings, and then add the transcendent creator deity that's in metaphorically above us, but actually is infinitely deep in the universe. Trying to breathe into it a little bit more, trying to breathe into its presence, her presence. All right, very good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for doing that. And I would also, part of our exercise, which is conceptual this time, is if you were looking for the high God way up high, would God be on the left side or the right side? Which side would God be on? Or maybe somewhere else? Be in the center, wouldn't, right? So the deity, by definition, is in the center of all things. And so if you have a center of all things in 3D, that Euclidean space is literally in the center of the universe. And Einstein liked that idea that the universe has a center, but he rejected it. He said, "Well, the math, we can't really figure that out. How could that be?" But that's something we're going to do here. We're going to think of deity as being the center of all things, but yet outside of time and space. It's kind of paradox. In the center, but outside of time and space. So that we'll get to that shortly. So anyway, back to the problem of evil and the mystery of iniquity and the problem of evil for God-centered spirituality. And I kind of wrap it up in one phrase, is that there's a need to have an integrative view of evil. So what is that? That is, there isn't just one slogan for evil, right? There isn't just one thing you can say about it. There's multiple layers of this problem, structures of evil. Some of the structure, there's structures of, there's evil in a person, but there's also evil in society. And there's also evil in fields, energetic fields of evil. And we need to get sophisticated about this because it's urgent right now, because out there in the countryside, there are fundamentalist thinkers who have a black and white view of this, and they attribute evil to a certain person, place, or class of people, and that they're the good guys, and out there are the bad guys. And so we really got to get a handle on this, because when you have this dualistic view, it moves you toward violence, right? So that's why I kind of have a mission here, is to get people to think about this with more subtlety and realize, the evil's in you too, right? Number one, in projecting it, but also that what you may think is evil, somebody else may not think is evil, one. Two, what you think is sin, it may not be sin. It depends on your point of view and your perspective. So now proceed. This is my professor, who I credit a lot, and I'd like to credit my teachers, who I walked into, like 69 years old, right? So I'm in a seminary with kids in their 20s. And I'm his age. And he really took interest in me as to why I was doing this late in life to study theology at Union Theological Seminary. And he was in for it a little bit because I'm a Urantia Book student, and that's something that these guys had never heard of. But this guy is supposed to have heard of it because he's a Jesuit, and Jesuits have heard of everything, but he had never heard of it. So that was my thesis advisor, and then my other advisor is Catherine Keller, who's a well-known liberal theologian. And liberal theologians are open-minded to everything in theology, and she also had never heard of the Urantia Book. And she's written like 25 books or something. So I had a mission to introduce this to these guys, but I told them that my problem that I want to work on is the problem of evil. And they were, yeah, okay, do that. But like nobody does it because they're kind of afraid to handle this in theology. Most of these people are stumped by this problem. And both of them admitted they don't write on this topic. It's just too hard. This is another fellow, just real quickly. His name is Gary Dorian. He's with my other professor. This is in the chapel at the seminary there. Gary Dorian is a historian of theology. So what I do is the history of the view of evil in the West, mainly, in Western Christian thought. And so this guy was my mentor for history. So starting out this discussion is, in the beginning, in the Old Testament, is really the best story to this day about the problem of evil, particularly very damaging, traumatic evil experienced by Job. And you know the story of Job, right? That his family was destroyed, and his wealth was taken, and his health was also ruined. And his friends, pointing at him, come to him and tell him, it's all your fault, all right? Which was a prevailing view back then and is even today, that if bad things befall you, it's your karma, right? It's your fault. And you're getting what you deserve. You're getting just desserts. And that's a certain view of evil that was held in ancient times, and it's also in the Eastern religions as well. And so he continued, you can see in the gesture, or in his posture, that he thinks he's righteous. So if you remember reading this like in Sunday school or something, the whole time he says, I'm not evil. Just bad stuff happened to me. That doesn't mean I'm evil. And they said, no, it couldn't be any other way, because look at all the things you lost. He lost everything. And so that's why we need a better theology of evil. And theodicy is the word for that. Theodicy is the theology of evil. So nobody really knew much what to do with this really until the medieval Christian era was coming to an end. Everything was so rigid and so doctrinaire on this problem, with exceptions like Thomas Aquinas was really pretty subtle, but nobody was reading him, just other scholars are reading him. But for the most part, until the 16th century, nobody really questioned this black and white view of evil, that comes down from Judaism and Christianity until this guy, his name is David Hume, and then this fellow here who coined the phrase theodicy is Leibniz, the great mathematician Leibniz. So let me read this to you. It says, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing to prevent evil? Then God is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Is he both able and willing to prevent evil? So where did evil come from? So this is now classic, 300 years later, everybody quotes this. This is your problem here. Because if God is infinitely loving and good and powerful, then there shouldn't be evil. That makes sense? There should not be demonic events like the war in Gaza if we have a loving God, right? And so these guys are founders of the field. And now we have what I call the co-founders, confounders. Not the co-founders, the confounders is really Nazism in a way was the end of the Christian era in the sense of, we can't explain this, man. This is so horrendous. The Holocaust, World War II, and Hiroshima, of course, and Nagasaki. This confounded everybody working on this problem, which is why my professors weren't working on the problem.
This is happening now.
And it's happening now. So the demonic evil, or what technically they call horrendous evil, is something that no one has an answer to, really. So they just say, well, it's mystery, or the mystery of iniquity, which is a phrase from the book of Revelation. Now I'm going to bring into the mix the Urantia Book. Why am I doing this? Because the Urantia Book comes into the picture on our planet at the end of World War II. And it's believed that the finishing touches on the Urantia text were right at actually around the time of the closing of the war and Hiroshima and the discovery of the Holocaust. And so the final touches and editing of it. So that's why I think it's where we want to insert this discussion is World War II, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and now we've hit bottom. Humanity's hit bottom in the horrors that we have perpetrated. So the question that I pose here is that in a civilized world, how do you explain genocide? How do you explain that? Secondly, how do we account for inequities that are really horrific? And third, what about climate change, environmental collapse? So where's God in all of this? So I'm suggesting as a hypothesis that deity is functioning, especially when you're in the deepest crisis, which is in a way a kind of a cliche, right? So when you hit bottom and you're alcoholic, then you turn your life over to a higher power, right? So this is, in a way, the planet has to be turned over to a higher power. And one way that can occur is with a scripture. But there's a lot of other ways, right? Obviously, there are energetic powers that come into being at times of crisis, and somehow there's an infusion of grace that comes forward.
To work itself in the consciousness scheme of things.
So keep in mind, how is it that we have horrendous evils in our current evolutionary time? How could that possibly coexist with these incredible inventions and the artificial, all these great things that we have that make life better? We still have, demonic events. So this is boiling down philosophically. These are incompatible propositions. God is sovereign and all-powerful, Father, Mother, Creator. 2, God is infinitely benevolent, just, and loving. 3, evil plagues our lives. So same thing, restated. These are incompatible propositions. So these are the key tenets that we're trying to deal with in this problem. And the way I come at it is using these periods based on, if anybody is familiar with spiral dynamics, which are the evolution of culture in stages. So there's a traditional stage of culture, there's a modern stage of culture, there's postmodern, I didn't put that, but modern, postmodern, we're in postmodern right now. And then the future is an integrative culture. And that's my appeal to you with the problem of evil, is bring it down to the integrative. But what does it mean to be integrative? Integrative does not mean to be New Age. Why do I say that? New Age is not inclusive of traditional. So what kind of defines a New Ager is they reject the tradition, they reject the Bible and all this rigid dogma that they forced on me when I was a child, and I was in the synagogue, or I was in the Sunday, so we reject the traditional morality and we become rebels, more or less, right? And then we move to Asheville or Ashland.
Either one.
Or either one, Asheville as well, right?
Yeah, move to Asheville, please.
Yeah, right, there you go. The modernists are basically, let's dodge these issues and let's focus on making money, technology, rational secular life. But the integrative integrates the two of them, right? So can you do it? Can you find a way to do that? Well, you need an integrative philosophy to do that. That's how you do it. And it's hard. And it's blending things that don't go together, easily go together. How do biblical values get blended with postmodern, artificial intelligence-driven culture? How does that get done? Yeah.
They say they're talking about the same thing, that we think that they're talking about the same thing, but they're not. It's weird. I don't understand.
It just takes a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work to do this thing, and that's why we're not doing it. Very few people are. What we got is traditionalists that are sort of gathering around Trump, who himself is actually a modernist. He's not a traditionalist. But they're gathering around that, and then the progressives are anything but that, right? But progressivism doesn't have a coherent philosophy as far as I can tell. It's just a rejection of the past. And now we're trying to reinvent the wheel. So moving on, I know I said a lot there. So these are so what you do when you have this problem and you're biblically oriented is you come up with solutions. And the solutions that the Christian tradition, I'm talking up to the 17th century, 18th century, it's a lot of time, was spent how we explain the presence of evil and darkness, right? So there are really 5 ways they did it. The first way is the one you hear about the most, right? The devil makes us do it, that this is like a fundamentalist Christian view, right? That the devil's present and the devil's inspiring, these dark, these behaviors. But there's sort of the secondary traditional view is more Eastern Christian, and it's in Jewish mysticism and other forms of mysticism, actually throughout the world, which is there's a co-creative relationship of humans and deity. And this relationship is that we're the weak partner, but we're a partner. We're a junior partner with deity. We're not an equal partner, but we are a partner. Whereas the prevailing view in Western culture is we're not a partner because we're too sinful to be a partner. And that's more Western Christianity. It says you are so mired in original sin that you can't do anything. What you need to do is go to the priest to get the sacrament. You have to go get all 7 sacraments. And even then, in the medieval view of things, if you partake of the sacraments, it only lasts for a few weeks, right? You have to go back and get the sacrament again, right? So it was never a it was a system of slavery in a way, but on the other hand, they were illiterate, and they didn't know any different, and in a lot of ways, medieval life there was a sense of security that people had, but there was not progress, because it was. You need the church, right? The church has to call the shots. You have to come there for everything. So you got to break out of that. So the next view of evil that's traditional is more philosophic, and it comes from St. Augustine. And he was the genius of that millennium who said that free will is free. However, it's shackled by sin. However, we're made as good. God makes us good. How do we know that? It says in the Bible, God created the world and created, it was good. Then he created humans, and they were very good. They were very good. So the premise is we're very good. However, there was the fall into evil, the fall of mankind, that erased the goodness. However, the goodness is still present in theory, because we were made good, but then we fell. So it's a conundrum, right? So this is how he understood Christ coming into the picture was he was going to fix it by redeeming you with his blood, right? And that was the only way it could work. So if you accept that, then your freedom actually conduces to goodness. Why does it do that? Not because you're that good, but because God is in control. And even if you do bad stuff, God will harvest what they call greater goods. So this is the greater good theory of evil. That it's and the bottom line philosophically is evil is not real. It's apparently harmful and apparently traumatizing, but it's ontologically not real, meaning there's no being to evil. It's an apparent reality, and guess who echoes that idea? Most of the Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, right? Evil is an illusion. Evil is Maya, right? It's not a real substance. It doesn't have being. And so that was picked up by these guys.
So it leads to greater understanding and thus will promote good.
It leads to God's grace that takes your evil behaviors and generates goodness through blessing and grace, but especially through the church. So you have to have the church and the sacraments to convert it to goodness. So this is a way for them, this you see how this is helpful, but very dangerous, because you are basically helpless and deity is doing all the work, right? Even if you really are sinful, deity is fixing things because God's in control. And that's where you get the fourth conclusion. God is in control. It's all under control is another way of saying that. It's a simpler way of saying it. So this is an all-powerful God. Don't forget, it's all-powerful God, right? All-powerful, otherwise it's not God. God has to be all-powerful. So if God is all-powerful, then evil is an illusion.
Byron, I want to ask you a question.
Oh, I should have said we're not supposed to take questions, but if you have a question,
I wanna
say
go
it
back-
loudly. Say
I
it.
want to go back 3 slides to Hitler.
Okay.
I grew up in a Jewish community in Los Angeles. And there's a faction of the Jewish faith that said the reason for the Holocaust was Jews in Europe were not Jewish enough, and God was punishing them.
Okay, let me
Where
get
does that fit in your diagram?
this one. It's under God's control. God is creating conditions for you to learn stuff. Right? So if you're a bad Jew or a bad Christian, look, God is controlling your actions, actually, in this view. This is the view that Calvin took, right? Calvinism, if you're Presbyterian or something. The underlying theory, and in Judaism they have the same idea. There's a kind of mechanistic view of Judaism, which is God is all powerful and he's teaching you stuff all the time. Even the Holocaust teaches you stuff. And it's a cop-out theory for Jews, because nobody can explain the Holocaust. Forget it. And that's not a valid philosophical way to do it, although it's done all the time. And an entire tendency called Calvinism, that's what they do. But I'll tell you, Calvinism, when you finally sit down and read him someday, the guy's a genius. It's incredibly interesting. But it's wrong. But it has an important truth in it. Apparently the case that there is some kind of serendipity and things seem to work out. And we were at lunch with a friend who said, there was just God was always providing what I needed when I needed it. And so there is a sense that God is controlling things, but it's ultimately illusory, because in the modern view and in the postmodern view, we can't hold that. Why is that? Because we're evolutionists. We believe in evolution now. Evolution is a demonstration that things are imperfect in all cases. Species evolve and they go extinct. 99% of species have gone extinct. That's not perfect. So evolution is the refutation of this idea. So it's really a medieval idea. So it's all under God's control. Then the final one is, how do we get a hold of evil? Look to the future. It's pretty bad now, but great stuff is coming up. And we're going to get to that a little bit more. So those are traditional. And I'm going to run through these. So the devil makes us do it. That's the first of the 5, right? So it's the New Testament. It's also the Old Testament. But the Old Testament doesn't really have a devil who's active like God, like the devil is in the New Testament. The devil's active. And this is known as the cosmic conflict model. And that's a good phrase, because the worldview of the early Christians was, there's a war in heaven. Jesus came to fight evil personally, and his opponent is a person, Satan, right? So it's a personal battle. So that's their view, and this has been modernized by you think, well, that's primitive, that's old-fashioned, that's rigid, but philosophers have taken this on. This wonderful thinker showed these guys are really right in modern terms, that there's something here and we don't know what it is, because we have no other way to explain horrendous evil other than that there has to be some kind of demonic presence. And so you can give current philosophic language and make it sound plausible. And this guy makes it sound plausible. And the reason I bring him up is it points us to the Urantia Book, because it does that as well. So their slogan is, we are victims of these demonic beings, right? They're off planet. That's their slogan. And that's very current right now among fundamentalists. So the second one, which we covered, was we're junior partners. That's Eastern Orthodox teaching, basically. It's also was, the Eastern Orthodox did not accept this original sin, which made you unable to cope with evil at all. You needed grace. You needed the sacraments, right? You needed the priest. So the Eastern Church didn't really buy that. They have some of that, but they don't take it literally, because bottom line for them is we are partners through our worship, meditation, prayer, what they call prayer of the heart, which we did it in the beginning, which was breathing into the heart. That was a practice they did, was breathing into the heart to feel the presence of divinity. That is not a practice that they were doing in monasteries in Western Europe. Not really. That's a humanistic view of things that is less known than it should be. Then there was a revival of this idea. If any of you are Methodists, Wesley and others in 16th, 17th, 18th century started saying, well, wait a minute, we're not such sinners that we can't do anything for ourselves, that we're hopeless. And really Protestants, many of them view that, not all of them, but liberal Protestants, like the Methodists, Wesley, John Wesley, said, no, we're junior partners with God, right? And that was contrary to the Catholics. So their approach is, we can get to perfection if we're humble, and if we cultivate our spiritual growth. This is two. Let's do the third one. This is the. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm now going to a little bit deeper analysis of the devil made us do it. It is a doctrine that is updated in the Urantia Revelation, and it's a surprising thing if you're new to this, which is this real modern sounding text tells you that there really was a Lucifer and a Satan. So that's a toughie, right? Because we're supposed to be beyond that. So if we're liberal, Christians, Jews, whatever, we don't believe in the devil, right? So here's a modern text saying, yes, there was, but it's not the mythic way it's presented. It has almost like a scientific picture of the presence of these beings that are demonic beings. And the Urantia Book says that the source of this difficulty is the Lucifer rebellion, which you hear about in the Bible and from Christians in a very cursory way, that was a literal being who fell from the light and then tried to contaminate us on earth with doctrines that were demonic. And on earth, we don't have time to go into this much, but there was a default of the kind of administration of spiritual truth on the planet. Why? Because the angels followed Lucifer. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe, right? Angels going to the dark side. So right. I'm injecting this into our discussion and making it complicated, I know that. But it's important for us to know that the traditional view is not to be wholesale rejected, because you can update it in certain ways to hold some of the truths. And traditionally, they got it, that there was something on the face of the earth that was really dark. I mean, it's the Roman Empire. It was a really, really cruel time. It was easy for the Jews at that time to believe in a demonic presence. And it was easy for them to also think of Christ as someone opposing that demonic presence. And Christ said that. He said that he was personally dealing with Satan. And the Bible records it fairly well. So the Urantia Book tells you who this is. So remember in the Bible, if you think back, that it's the God of this world. Remember? So Jesus opposed the God of this world. And they say it a number of times. Well, who's the God of how could the God of this world be this bad guy? Right? So the Urantia Book explains that the God of this world is the chief angelic being of the planet, whose name is Caligastia, revealed in the text. So I found this picture that might look like what he looked like. And so this is a big footnote to the discussion of the devil made us do it. Because here we're hearing a new reframing of this ancient teaching of the presence of these fallen angels. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong thing. Oh, what do I do? Okay, thanks. So I want to get in here a few more things from the Urantia Book before we move on. This is the initiation of Judaism, right, by Melchizedek, and this is from Genesis 14. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine to Abraham, right? So there's Abraham. Abraham gave tithing to this guy, right? So if you know your Bible, you know that this occurred as supposedly a historic event. So the Urantia book tells us it is a true event. It's not a mythic story. And this Melchizedek is the angel who incarnated, this is a hard one, but an angelic being who incarnated for this mission. Why did he do it? He did it so that monotheism could be planted on the earth, so that you could have an incarnation of Jesus. So they had to have a lineage, the Jews, who could receive this being. So now we're told that Melchizedek has replaced the God of this world as the chief angel of the planet. That's a new revelation. That's from the Urantia lineage. And his name is Machaventu Melchizedek. And he's here. So another very important tenet is in the Urantia revelation is that, in particular, this was the place the Creator, Jesus, wanted to incarnate because of the Lucifer rebellion. Only a very high being could break the back of this thing. So this affirms that Jesus was a true person, that Jesus was a divine incarnation, but it adds a much more depth to the understanding with a 774-page biography of Jesus in the Urantia book. This is just one more slide on the Urantia text. This is where this text came through in Chicago, and it's an incredible story, but we don't have time to go into it. And these are the people that received it. So let's get back to these teachings. So now I'm going to go back over this idea that we're junior partners and add the Urantia update of the concept. So again, remember we said the teaching, Eastern Orthodox teaching, and the Christian humanism. The Wesley, also the Quakers, by the way, are another very good example of Christian humanism that said, you don't have to have sacraments. You're not such a sinner that you can't meditate and bring in these energies. So these are very strong traditional ideas that the Urantia book updates and adds depth to. And it updates by revealing that there's an inner light, which is what the Quakers said. And secondly, that evolution is actually partnership. The evolution of humankind is a partnership with deity. So let's get back to the last several of these traditional views. And this one is that free will leads to greater goods. It's a very difficult, paradoxical, but important idea, and partially true. Just reviewing that, we talked about how it's all under divine control, partially true, but not everything in every action. Here's the additional idea that I want to introduce on this proposition, that free will leads to greater goods. And this is the idea that a rebellion of angels actually led to greater good universe-wide. Now that's a tough one. Secondly, that all of our good actions are saved in the heart of deity, that the good things we do are remembered in the mind of God and are contributing to God's evolution. And thirdly, that our souls are the harvest of greater goods. By confronting evil, we're generating greater goods in our souls. We call it soul making. And let's finish up on this. This is another huge thing from our tradition. It's all under God's control. The Urantia Book adds these propositions. They're tough, so bear with me. Let's try to get these. That an omnipotent God, according to both East and West, really does everything for us. And this is a fallacy, as we've said. And God is all-powerful, but there's a subtleties to it. God doesn't do everything. That's called omniscience. That's God actually doing it. Like God's doing through me something. That's known as omnificent. But omnipotence doesn't require that we're puppets, right? So that's a key distinction. Second, is now in blue here. If God is in control, that means there are no accidents. And so a lot of New Age folks will tell you, oh, there's no accidents, man. Everything is meant to be. Everything's supposed, whatever happens, you get hit by a car, it's supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen. And in fact, that's kind of what they said to Job. They said, well, you lost everything. You lost your health. You lost your wife. You lost your kids. It's supposed to happen. There's not an accident that you, Job, lost all these things. It's not. And that's this idea that accidents are not possible. Why? Because God's in control. It's not good accidents happen if God's in control. How could we have tragic failures and collapses of whole civilizations if God's in control? So this is a more sophisticated view that says, yes, there really are accidents. There are accidents. They're real accidents. And an asteroid can slam into your planet. God did not plan for the asteroid to slam into your planet. It's an accident of scientifically understood. And so the Urantia Book is telling us that in the center of things, in paradise, there are no accidents. There are no tragedies. So if you're a New Ager that says, all these things that are happening are supposed to happen, you're actually up in heaven. You're totally ungrounded when you deny that there really are failures, that there really are tragedies that are tragic. They're tragic. And that they're accidents. So in denial of that, you're trying to affirm this medieval idea that everything's under control. So you have a bad theology. So moving on is the final of the classic views, which is all's well that ends well. So Shakespeare wrote a whole play about this. And the traditional view is that everything works out because you go to heaven. So you may think evil is pretty bad, but you're going to get saved, if not here in heaven, or you go to hell. And the other biblical view is that at the end of time, at the end of human history, everybody gets redeemed except for those who go to hell, right? So that's biblical. But the Urantia Book adds to this teaching much refinement, telling us that in the afterlife, your trauma will be healed in your ascension through stages, through levels of ascension. It also tells us that it's not, again, God in control of everything, because some of us who get to the other side choose to not solve our problems there. We opt out. And this is an important doctrine. I know this sounds arcane. It's the doctrine of conditional immortality. There's a lot of Christians think everybody gets saved. This is saying no, not everybody does, because free will is important, and you can ascend to heaven and say, I don't want to do it. I'm Hitler. I was a bad person. I don't want you to fix me. I want you to snuff me out. So that's a more sophisticated view of how things end. So in other words, the end is not deterministic. It's not determined ahead of time. You still can say no in heaven, to your own ascension and healing. And thirdly, in the collective sense of things, everything does work out. So for the individual, it may not. So evil wins, in a sense, over certain individuals. It could be Stalin in heaven. Stalin does not get redeemed. Mao does not get redeemed. They choose to just snuff me out, get me out of here. But in the collective sense, evil is overcome. And that is a traditional doctrine, but it's refined in the Urantia Book. A few more here. So you guys have the energy to do the modern part? Yeah. Want to go there? So here's the three modern propositions. And these are intense, you guys, but in the 19th century, the Christian thought and Judaic and even Muslim thought was beginning to understand that evolution is a factor in God's universe. And not until then did anybody ever think, really, that all this stuff is evolving, and therefore that's why we have evil. You know, it was a flat land of good and evil. It was not a progression from, you know, to deprivation to happiness. You know, there was no progression, no progress, sense of progress. So that's the first one. The second one is, you know, we think of God as not sort of an artist who's trying to balance things and maybe doesn't quite, may not, what God wants, may want something, but God doesn't get what God wants. Now consider this. If you have a medieval God, that God gets everything that God wants. Why? Because it's a rigid, one-dimensional view. But a modern view is that God is taking risks. How do we know that? Well, there was a bunch of fundamentalist Baptist theologians that got together only 30 years ago and said, we are wrong. We're wrong in our theology, because if you read your stupid Bible here, you have cases where God doesn't get what God wants. And that's contrary to what we're saying, because we're saying God prevails, his will always prevails. So if God's will is always prevailing, why are these things happening like Hiroshima? That's not God's will. But there were Jewish theologians, you know, that basically, you know, what we were saying before, Jeff, that they said, well, it must be God's will. You know, Holocaust was God's will. That's what they had to say, because they're medieval in their thinking.
Einstein was the one who said God doesn't play dice.
Yeah, and that's also a fallacy. Well, no, we'll get to that later. But so the idea that God takes risks is the idea that God is dancing around these issues, right? So if you're Netanyahu and you decide that you want to bomb these women and children, that's not God's will. Like, you know, God, am not getting my way, right? So now what is God's will? Well, God's going to have to reconfigure his will, isn't he? So when evil is being done, God's will is not being done. But God's will is going to change in a certain sense, right? God's general universal will does not change, right? That's changeless. It's always for the good. But for the individual situation, what God wants for that individual situation changes moment by moment. That's why you've got to tune in all the time. So that's this modern view that has emerged from these fundamentalists that renounce their view. One more is really important, is the, almost done.
How do anybody know what God wants at every given moment, but in a person?
Let's come to that.
Okay.
So that's through meditation. But God provides another way to deal with evil, right? So in the modern view, we are evolving our souls. That's not traditional. Although it is esoteric Christianity is really there, but God is providing, in the modern view of psychology, is that we're evolving, right? We're growing. And so in theology, we said that we began to get it that the inner life is being built by your encounter with evil. So this is another way to manage the relationship with evil, is to think of it as growth producing. And adversity, tragedy, suffering is growth. So these are the three modern views. So let's look a little bit more at these, get through these. This is advanced, and you guys have been a very good audience. So there was a point at which everybody had to cop to the fact that if we have biological evolution, we have evolution of galaxies, and stars evolve, everything evolves, well, it must be that God evolves. But that's impossible. How could God evolve, right? And that sounds crazy. But this is the modern view now for most modern thinkers, is that there's a God, an aspect of God that's in heaven does not evolve. But God is in time and space and is evolving in nature and in culture. That's deity evolving with us, right? So this was a very great idea. And then there was another theologian named David Ray Griffin, very important theologian, who focused especially on demonic side of things, saying that demonic evil is evolutionary product. So that, the black and white view of the ancients is now an evolutionary view of that if we don't do something about it, evil becomes worse, and finally gets to bombing women and children, right? And that is demonic. And that is also an aspect of deity as evolution. You go forward or you go backward. And so the Urantia Book affirms these. These are doctrines that Alfred North Whitehead and Teilhard de Chardin, these great thinkers. And the Urantia Book also affirms that they're correct, that the upshot of this is that evil is not an illusion, because the ancients believe that, right? And Hinduism believes that. Buddhism, but that's a fallacy. And that's a very big deal, because if you don't think that evil is really hurting people, because basically they would say, well, yeah, it looks like they're suffering, but it's to a greater good, right? So this is how ancient people allowed for things like slavery. God is working out his will through the slave. The slave is experiencing this, and there's going to be redemption. So, and the Urantia Book also adds some other propositions which we're going to skip. We don't have enough time.
So you would say it was a necessary evil?
You might say that, yeah. That it's necessary because we're imperfect and we're evolving, and so you're going to have these evils, what you're calling evil. People are hurt, people are killed, and that's because we're imperfect. And not only that, it's not just a secular world. God is in it, experiencing it, right? We've covered that enough, I think. I'm going to skip that one. This is important, and we're almost done with this. If God is all-powerful and loving, but is unable to control everything, it may still be the case that God can put in place mechanisms that things turn out all right, okay? But not for each person, only for the total. And this we call providence. Providence cannot save everybody. Remember I was saying before, some people are irredeemable by their own choice. So that invalidates the idea that God is in control and everything is going to turn out. Not everything turns out. Some things are just pure tragedy, and that's that, period, right? And so this states that providence functions for the total. It's like you put in highways here in Ashland, and that functions for everybody. But maybe some people will have accidents and die on the highway. So, but the structure allows everybody to but each individual may not, in the end, you may die on the highway. So it's kind of that idea that deity's job is with regard to the total and deals with the function of a creature in terms of your function. In other words, if you have a mission, it isn't you with the mission, it's the function. And so you somehow become the person, the functionary that does this. But that's more an action of the total. You're contributing to everybody, and maybe your life, you'll end up bankrupt and sick, right? And that's happened to. I read recently that a lot of those leaders of the American Revolution, 1776, ended up broke, sick, hated, but the function for the total was a very positive good. So ultimate salvation only applies to wholes, not to every individual. So you see how this is a more sophisticated, but you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think this is fairly straightforward, that we're here for growth of our souls. And that is a very straightforward way to understand the problem of evil. And let's skip these, and now we're going to get to the final piece here. And this is from the Urantia Book to add subtlety to this discussion that's important to close off the discussion. And that is that there are gradations of evil. And this quote is really strong, that what this text calls evil is not what we call evil. What we say evil often when we mean sin, like bad stuff, right? But a more advanced definition says that evil is unintended. It's like manslaughter in the law, right? Secondly, sin is not as bad as we think either. Because sin is consciously doing things you know are wrong, but it's episodic. But the worst of it is what we call iniquity. And iniquity is what you need to distinguish this, because iniquitous behavior is systematic, conscious, deliberate hurting of others, right? And so this is psychopathic, behavior. But it's not right to have a kid come into Sunday school class and tell the kid that they're sinners. That is a massive fallacy, philosophic and theological fallacy. And even with that, they don't have a definition of sin that's coherent, actually, in the Bible. It's just a blanket term for everybody. So they conflate these things, evil, sin, and the demonic, or the iniquitous. They throw it into one big word called evil. So I'd like you guys to go home knowing that there are gradations of this, and I have a handout for you that we can look at real fast here, because I've gone on too long almost.
No, you were just getting started.
Well, actually, this is the good stuff here. And this has the chart that's up on the screen, or it's going to be up on the screen. Would you pass this out to everybody? So we're going to look at gradations of what I call gradation of moral descent. Sounds pretty bad. From error to evil to sin, and then to iniquity. And we won't go to the other stuff, just those four terms. So in this chart, which you have in front of you, is the following. So in medieval times, people like Calvin said that even accidents are meant to be and God's will. So this is a fallacy we've seen, right? This is the view that God is in control of everything, including a sparrow falling from the sky. If the sparrow fell from the sky, God knew that was going to happen and made it happen, okay? And that is really what Calvin says, but he says it beautifully. It's like plausible, but it's a fallacy. error is another dimension we haven't said much, but think of it this way. Children make mistakes, right? Do you call your children sinners because they make mistakes? Well, Christianity does, more or less. So that is a gradation of going toward that which is evil. So we get to evil. And here we have not what the Christians say, but what the Urantia Book says, which is that evil is actually not intended, usually. Or you're sloppy, you're not rigorous, and you're conflicted, and you don't figure things out, and you're reckless. And that's what they call evil. And I think that's a better way to define it. But sin, then when you get to sin, is what is more narrow definition, that sin is deliberate, conscious, planned, like crimes, right? Crimes are planned by the criminal. But if you just do one heist of a bank and then you quit, you're not iniquitous. You're just sinful. So if you're in court, the judge will say, well, you just did it one time, and you're not a serial thief. And so we won't give you life in prison, right?
Only in California.
Maybe California. So
Can I?
So we are done, and we're going to have. Oops, sorry, put that back on. We're going to have questions, but this is the final slide. So what I'm suggesting is all these things are partially true. The traditional stuff was onto some good stuff. They were onto great ideas. There was a presence of demonic beings on the planet, right? But they had a mythic framing of it. Now we need a modern framing of it. So there is a sense that God is in control, but not total control of all things. But there's a overall control, but not every detail. Then there was, free will is free. And there really is inherent evil. So what we're trying to get is a multiple perspective. Otherwise, we're going to have some violence in this society if we don't get a multi-perspectival, they call it. Finally, I think the Urantia Book is our best hope to integrate these things. That's my view. And we need better cosmologies, which we now have. And finally, a very advanced idea is that there are two levels of deity. One level is eternal, right? The other level is evolutional. Nobody had that in mind until the 19th century. Until then, everything was deity is absolute. That's why Christianity didn't make sense, because they couldn't allow for errors and accidents and growth and imperfection. So we're done, and let's have some questions or comments. Yes, sir.
Byron, can you go back one slide?
Yes, sir.
Because this is something I've thought about for quite a while. Is how do you relate these different levels, accident, error, evil, sin, and iniquity? I'd like to give an example.
Okay.
So a man has a car, and he drives that car, and something kind of launches up from the road and punctures his crankcase, such that oil starts to gush out of the crankcase of his car. Now that man gets a bucket. Well, that was an accident.
That's an accident.
Something happened, oil's now coming out of his crankcase. He's got a bucket now, and he's capturing the oil, then pulls that full bucket away from his car, but it happens to be next to a storm drain, right there at the curb, and as he turns to get something out of the car, he kicks the bucket spills oil into that storm drain, which then goes down and pollutes a stream, kills all kinds of fish. That was evil. That oil kills stuff in the environment. Wasn't intended, okay? But that was evil that happened there. He didn't intend it. Now, the man goes, well, my oil kind of conveniently went away. So when he goes home, the next time he changes his oil, he's like, I don't want to have to go and recycle that oil, so I'm just going to pour it down the storm drain. It disappears, but he knows it kills fish. That was sin. He made a deliberate, conscious choice of evil. All right, now the next time he changes his oil, he goes, you know what? I'm going to do this every time I change my oil because I got an idea for how I can go and actually make a business of cleaning the oil up out of the polluted water. And that's iniquity. That's demonic. Anyway, that's an example I wanted to give.
That's like what the government.
One guy did all of these.
It all.
Yeah.
It's monetized, like.
Anybody else, questions, comments,
So,
arguments? Yes, sir.
Well, my comment is on the central universe is where perfection is. That was instantaneously created in perfection, and the rest of the galaxy and the universe is all evolutionary and thus imperfect and has the potential for evil and error and everything else. But the levels of the universes, I mean, then there's more universes being created, but everything is evolving towards perfection. I guess that's the point, is it's all evolving towards perfection. And as humans, what we can do is meditate and strive towards goodness.
Well said, thank you very much. Yes, yes.
so are you saying there's no longer a Lucifer and Satan-like demonic presence on the planet Earth, and what happened to those guys?
There's a controversial view that they were adjudicated and stated to be the case, that this occurred in 1985, and they were removed from existence by
They
the
chose not to remain.
Yeah, they actually chose it.
How did that happen?
Trial.
In heavenly realms. There was a court case against them in heavenly courts.
And so there's no replacements for them in that sense?
Yes, the replacement is, remember I mentioned this Melchizedek.
Oh,
It has replaced not Lucifer and Satan, because they were across this part of the universe, but on our planet was that guy, remember Caligastia, the guy with the beard that I showed you a picture. That's the revealed name of the demonic being running the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has been also removed,
there's
but that's
no demonic-
disputed.
There's no current day demonic being.
That is, again, disputed, but it is the view of many of us that, because we were told this in transmissions from these beings, that they were removed, including the fallen angels, of which there were millions of them.
And so what's the implication of that then in this world?
The hard thing to handle about it is that they have their human followers, going back to prehistory. So it's a place we can go here in this discussion if you want, right? So it's very important.
Yeah.
Because the presence of horrendous evil and demonic evils is hard to explain in an advanced postmodern civilization. And we're going along with all these incredible technologies, and then we're bombing children by the thousands. How can you have these things together? And this is an explanation that, and some of the Urantia folks just don't buy that they've removed these beings because there's so much demonic activity. But the alternate view, at least my own view, personal view, is that the minions that followed them are in control of our planet, but they're humans. And they're somewhat organized and behind the scenes. And by the way, they have most of the money. And so if that were the case, they have a lot of power for now. So there's ambiguities in this. I mean, I'm totally with you, in line with you on this. Oh yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I think it's a harder case to make, and that's why they've not really won that many cases. But with genocidal war, it's easy now to win these cases. And really, it's what it comes down to. If you can't get these into courts, you'll never stop it. And it happened with the Nuremberg trials. Don't forget, we won World War II. Then we did punish the Nazis somewhat, right? So that's what has to happen.
Right, but we took over this country, no repercussions, even with what's going on in the Middle East. You didn't have a, you know, when you're dealing with these complex situations and one side is saying, my whole goal is that you don't deserve to live and you don't deserve to exist, and then the other side is fighting back, these very oversimplified definitions don't disentangle these complexities through the generations.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I don't know where that falls into your chart there, but
Yeah.
that seems to be so much of our problem, that we want to have these things where it only is like this or it's only like that, and there's so much complexity and nuance that we have to be able to hold and work through
To solve it.
to solve the problem.
So I
And
would,
again, not just arm wrestle to the next tussle.
I would add to what you just said, is that if you can establish iniquity as a category,
Yeah.
that is a way in law
And
to say, we need to have reparations. In other words, murder, there's no statute of limitations on murder, right? So there should be no statute of limitations on genocide of Native Americans. So there should be compensation for them. And in a way, they've kind of done that in a lousy way, right? But you can adjudicate that, and you can say, they shouldn't be living on these lousy reservations. They should be given everything they need, because we committed genocide. And according to the Genocide Convention, this is genocide. And the punishment has to be dealt out to them. So that's why I think this is helpful. Because if you said it's either good or evil, you don't have enough to make your case. Is like, are you lumping that in with somebody, stealing a loaf of bread? That's also the same evil. You need to have gradations of evil, and that's what we have in law anyway, right? So we need to have that in our theology. We don't have it, but we have it in law. Why do we have it in law? Because these guys have real facts in front of them, so they have to have gradations in the law, And so thank you. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. In conclusion, I guess.
Can you talk about your book for a minute?
This is all from the book, but the book has a big piece I want to maybe add, thank you, is that the better thinkers, it seems to me, that are on this topic have embraced another ancient doctrine I didn't bring up, which is the doctrine of apophasis, which means this is so deep that you will never have any way of explaining it. And so that is helpful, because humility requires that you, the human, cannot explain everything. Otherwise, you're the creator. And if you put yourself in the place of the creator, that itself is evil, right? So a lot of modern thought is too self-confident in its conclusions. And that's because they don't have apophatic view, which is, there's depths here of infinity, depths of infinite goodness and depths of infinite evil, like bottomless evil.
Absolutely.
And so that's how I end the book, actually. Thank you, because it's like a little bit too much to get into, but that some demonic evils are to be contemplated as possible because of the infinity of deity. So the infinitude of deity is such that you can have infinite good and infinite bad. And then you got to deal with it. You could blow up the whole planet. That would be like an infinite evil, right? You could do it. It's not that hard. We're close to it. So that would be a kind of unfathomable evil. And you have to have a concept of that it is possible. We could do this.
But we're doing it, not God.
What?
We are doing that, not God.
Yeah, but God gives you the freedom to do it. And
Free
that's
will.
the unfathomable part. Why does God give you that much.
Well, some things can't be easily understood. As you
Right.
just said a moment ago.
That's what I said. So
But that
that's,
doesn't make God blow up the planet, it's still us.
it's still us, but it's still possible.
We've been given free will.
And the Christians came up with this, the 4th century, they said, you know, we have these doctrines, we like our doctrines, they're pretty good doctrines. We have the doctrine of Trinity, the doctrine of Incarnation, all these other doctrines. And then some guy popped up and said, all well and good, but you know what? This is pride. You think you figured out what the structure of deity and that there's 3 persons and that Jesus did this and you know you got it in creed, you got all, you're prideful and you're going to have a fall. And that's called the apophatic method, that you affirm it and then you negate it. Like you state it and then you say, but we don't have infinite access to the mind of God, so we don't know if the doctrine could be wrong, you know. But it's the best we can do. So that's, I think, a way to conclude this discussion is that you have all these distinctions and put them out there, but keep the mystery in view, the mystery of it, so that you'll continue to be humble about it and continue to research. So please continue the research. Thank you, everybody.